Okay, so now back to the Jesus freaks. Now you were watching them as a relatively young teenager, and you thought there was maybe something there, and so you got curious about that, but you were also skeptical, and you said something about praying, and that was something that changed your life. So can you relate that?
Okay, here's what it came down to. This guy who was preaching, his name was Lonnie Frisbee. He said, "Come up here and I'll lead you in a prayer." And I walked up there and I thought, this isn't going to work.
Where were you?
I'm high school. It's high school at lunchtime in Newport Harbor High School in Southern California and Newport Beach, California. So it's lunchtime. I've walked forward in this public meeting that I was kind of attending. I was far enough away where I wouldn't look like I was a part of it, but close enough where I could kind of eavesdrop. No one invited me. Normally people become Christians because someone invites them to church or they share the gospel with them. No one did that for me. But I walked over to this evangelist and other kids were praying. He said, "Pray this prayer with me." And you know, Jordan, this is a prayer that I've led people in for over 50 years. And I've seen their lives changed. And there's nothing magical in this prayer. It's just a prayer based on biblical principles. But all prayer is it's communicating with God. And I don't think it has to be sophisticated. I think it needs to be genuine and from the heart. And the prayer went something along the lines of, "God, I know I'm a sinner, but I know Jesus Christ is a Savior who died on the cross for my sin and rose again from the dead. And I asked Jesus to come into my life. I didn't know what I was doing, but I believed it. And I didn't have an emotional experience, though people next to me did. One was laughing, one with joy, one was crying, maybe over their sins. I felt nothing, and I thought, that figures. God rejected me. But that I marked that day in 1970 as the day that Christ literally came into my life, and it changed everything for me. In fact, that weekend we had planned to go out into the mountains and take and smoke. And I went out with my friends and I broke away. I felt like being alone. I had this little baggie full of and a pipe and it just dawned on me, I don't want to do this anymore. And I don't know why I felt that way, but I thought, I don't want this anymore. And so I said, "God, if you're real, make yourself real to me." And I threw my pipe away and my away.
So that's a sacrificial gesture.
Yeah. And there was no one talking to me. No one explained like what we do when someone prays at one of our events. We're there to explain it. We give them a Bible. We're there to follow up on them. No one did any of this for me. But, you know, God says those that seek me will find me. Mm-hmm. And I think if we genuinely reach out to God, God will respond. You don't have to do anything perfectly. It just needs to be a movement of your heart toward God. And as much as I knew as a 17-year-old kid, I took that step of faith. And that is when my life began to change. And I've led people in this similar...
Well, your thoughts do make themselves manifest to you in keeping with the spirit of your aim. Mm-hmm. So you can think about this. So there's a long history since the early 1960s of study into a phenomenon known as the orienting response. And the orienting response is a collection of psychophysiological responses that orient you towards a goal.
Yeah.
Well, so imagine that when you envision a goal, you see a landscape appear in front of you in relationship to that goal. Mm-hmm. And it's quite straightforward to understand. I mean, if I want to walk across the room through an open door, the first thing I do is look at the door, right? So now I've oriented my aim towards the door. Now I can see a pathway to the door and I can see obstacles and pathways. I can see things that'll move me forward and things that'll get in my way. And that is the landscape of perception. There's an aim and a pathway, and there's obstacles and facilitators. And you're always in that. Yeah. Okay, your thoughts work that way too. Mm-hmm. So once you orient yourself towards an aim, the thoughts that come to you will have the voice of the spirit of that aim. Like this is technically how thought works. So if I'm angry with you and I want to have a fight, the thoughts that will come to me will be in keeping with that motivation. And the perceptions as well, like I'm going to transform your face even into a target, right? I'm going to allow the voice of anger to make itself manifest within me. So now imagine that I reconfigure my aim so that I'm aiming, however imperfectly, for the highest thing I can conceive of, however imperfectly. Well, that's the voice that's going to respond to the inquiries. Like, that's technically true.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure exactly what that means metaphysically, but it does imply that this is a terrifying thing to realize, is that, well, every aim is a prayer, and every spirit that responds to your aim responds in the voice of the spirit of that aim. And this is a terrible thing, because it means, for example, if you're possessed by resentment, it's the eternal spirit of vengefulness that will make itself manifest in your heart. That's exactly what happens. And so, well, there's no reason to assume at all that that wouldn't happen on the positive side. Okay, so now you made a gesture. You had decided somehow that the hedonistic pathway that you were pursuing, even if there was some search for enlightenment in it, say with the you weren't going to go down that route. And you can imagine that, you'd learned your lesson to some degree by watching your mother and her and her boyfriends, that there was some real danger in that, the Timothy Leary danger, right? Enlightenment without wisdom, let's say. So you made a gesture, you cast that aside, and then you opened yourself up, and the opening would be, well, I'm operating under the presumption that something better could appear, whatever that might be. Okay, so now you said the first time you did that in the schoolyard, there was no real response, but you believe in retrospect that something nonetheless changed. And then the next part of the story was this, right? So you're out with your friends and you decide to do something different. Okay, so now that's a prayer. That's a humble prayer. You're on your knees saying there's got to be more. Okay, so then what happens?
Well, so I go back to school, and the Christians there saw me and said, "Hey, Greg, come to our Bible study." And okay. And I went, and I felt kind of uncomfortable there. So
did you have friends outside that circle?
I had a bunch of low-life friends. I was going to one school called Corona Del Mar High School. That was kind of a school attended by affluent kids. So I was not an affluent kid. We lived in a little apartment in that area. And so it was very different. I literally transferred to this other school, Corona Del Mar High School, to Harbor High, to change my identity. I said, I want to become a different person. I don't want to be the preppy guy that everybody knows and trying out for the football team. I was ultimately rejected, but I hung out with those kids because my grades were too low. But anyway, so I wanted to be a different person, and I thought the drug culture had the answers. So what happened ultimately was I transferred to another school where I had relative anonymity because people didn't know me like they knew me at the school I transferred from.
Right.
But in reality, I ended up becoming a different person, just not in the way I expected. So I look back in retrospect and I think,
so you transferred to this new school so that you could get away from the preppy image and hang around with the more drug-oriented. And that isn't what happened. You ended up you ended up in the clutches of the Christians instead.
I did. But there was a time I was in the drug culture there, very much so, every day, as a matter of fact. But then when this transformation happened, so here's an illustration. So I'm walking across the campus and one of these Christians says, "Hey, Greg, here's a Bible." And they gave me a Bible. And I'm like, wow, I'm not going to carry this Bible around. So I shoved it in the pocket of my coat. And I went over to my friend's house, which was a stone's throw from our high school, because we would literally get high there every day at lunchtime. So I walked over there. I hadn't seen them since I'd prayed this prayer with these Christians. So I looked around and thought, I'm not going to walk in with the Bible. So I took the Bible and put it in the hedge in front of my friend's house. And I walked in. And they said, "Hey, Laurie, where you been?" I said, "Nowhere." "Hey, we're going to get high. You want to get high?" I said, "No, I don't want to." "Really?" They're kind of looking at me, "What's wrong with you? Like, what have you been doing?" I said, "Nothing. I wasn't going to talk about this." Suddenly, my mom walks in, holding my Bible. I'm thinking, what does this woman check her bushes when she comes in her house? And then the thing that struck me, says, "Who does this belong to?" I thought, lady, kids are doing drugs in your house and you're concerned about a Bible in the bushes? She holds it up. "Who does this belong to?" It's so funny. Every eye in the room went to the Bible and they looked at me. They knew there was a connection. And I said, that's mine. And one of my friends said, "You're reading the Bible?" I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Oh, are we going to be nice little Christians now and follow Jesus?" I said, No, maybe I'll hit you in the mouth. I don't know. I hadn't read.
That's a good response.
I hadn't read 1 Corinthians 13 or anything at that point. So, and so they all started mocking me. So it kind of helped me because I thought, these are not good people. And I don't need to hang around these people anymore. They made it easy to make a break with that crowd. So I thought, I'm going to give the Christians another try. And I went back to their meetings and ended up at this church that was in the middle of a spiritual awakening called Calvary Chapel, filled, packed out with people of all ages. And then Chuck Smith, who I mentioned earlier, this older man who is the pastor, opened up the Bible, and suddenly this book came alive to me. And suddenly I found truth. I never had any absolute truth in my life. I was just looking for something. I remember we're in school, and Ray Bradbury, the well-known author, came and spoke, and we thought, he's going to give us truth. We were just looking for someone to give us some truth, and he didn't have anything for us. And all of a sudden, I find that truth I've been looking for in the Bible. And so then you can't keep me away from the place. So I was like a sponge wanting to make up for lost time and just absorbing these things. And then my life was changing. And it wasn't long after that I started talking to people about this, because I wanted to talk to people that were like I used to be, cynical, closed off. And I wanted to say, if God could change someone like me, he can change you too. And fast forward 50 years, I'm effectively still doing the same thing.